Quebec, it remains the hardest hit province. There are well over half of the country's cases of COVID-19 in that province and almost 3,000 deaths. Now, despite all of that, Quebec is leading the provinces in reopening as many students return to class today. Just to be specific, that's outside the greater Montreal area. But with more on that, Raquel Fletcher joins us now. And Raquel, how did that look this morning?
Hi, Farah. Well, as you mentioned, it is outside of the greater Montreal region, and I just want to focus on that for a few seconds here because the reopening of Montreal has been pushed back till at least May 25th, and if the situation doesn't get better, it could be pushed back much farther than that. And, going back to school and daycare has been a very controversial decision. A lot of people not agreeing with the Legault government on this issue, but the government insists and has repeated that the situation is very much concentrated in the greater Montreal region. Those numbers of cases that we see keep going up every day. That is very much in the Montreal region. The rest of Quebec, they tell us, is doing rather well, and that's why they want to send elementary school students back to school. Now, it isn't mandatory. Parents can keep their kids at home if they don't feel like it's safe. And also daycares. They want to slowly, gradually open in the regions of Quebec that aren't facing quite the situation as Montreal is. So there are sort of two universes happening in Quebec. There's the Montreal region and then the rest of Quebec.
Before I let you go, and I wanted to know about the Cargill plant, because there's another Cargill plant now that's shutting down after another outbreak. Tell us more about that plant in Quebec.
So after the situation in Alberta, there were 64 employees who tested positive in that Cargill plant. It is going to close later this week. They tell us that they need to process the product that is there, and then they're going to close. We don't know for how long. As far as we know, we don't know how serious the cases are, but definitely raising alarm bells about our food production and how autonomous we are in food production and how this works. And of course, the Quebec Premier, one of the first things that he said at the beginning of this crisis is, as a province, and I don't think it's just Quebec, I think it's, other Canadian provinces looking at this as well, is where do we get our food from? What do we import? How does that affect us in a crisis? Very unfortunate that this Cargill plant has had to close, but I think it will create sort of a climate, sort of a situation politically where we start to look at, how do we change the way that we are producing food for our citizens?
Certainly. That's in a lot of sectors when it comes to supply chain and food. Thanks for that. That is Raquel Fletcher in Quebec City. Quebec, of course, not the only province moving forward with reopening today. Let's bring in our Mike Drolet. He joins us from Toronto. Mike, Ontario allowing more businesses to reopen today. What's that going to look like?
Well, clearly, Doug Ford is letting the leash off a little bit for the economy just to breathe a little bit. Over the weekend, it was hardware stores and garden centers, and today it's stores with a store with a street front entrance. So then it leaves malls out of the picture, but it's just so then people can, as we've seen in many cases, drive up, pick up their goods from the outside in very controlled situations. So those are going to be opened again today. 500 provincial parks will be open today, more towards the end of the week, although they're only going to be open for the day, as well as more construction sites will be allowed to operate. Before it was just sort of larger construction sites. Now it's going to be below grade apartments, condominiums, that sort of thing. Clearly the message from Doug Ford is that is for business to get ready. He's not saying exactly when the rest of the economy will reopen. He is asking to extend the state of emergency in Ontario, as you know, until May 31st, which he'll ask in legislature this week. But what he's going to be asking for then is just more power to be able to say when the rest of the economy can open, when other stores, when other businesses can get going, although with very strict measures, because as we know, the business world that we're going to be seeing in the coming months is not the one that we saw 3-4 months ago.
Certainly, Bay Street, which is, the financial core of this country, is going to look very different and not so much of hustle bustle that we've seen. Now, he wants to open the economy slowly, the Premier, that is, Premier Doug Ford. But the province's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Mike, still concerned about how this virus is spreading. Tell us more.
Well, considering we're having far fewer flights coming into the country, it makes sense that the total number of cases that within the country that are being transmitted from people who have traveled in the last 14 days is only at 7%. 22% of all the cases had contact with another confirmed case. And the key number is this: 36% had community exposure. And that's the concern. That's why there's real hesitancy to be able to open up everything quickly and open everything right away, because we're still getting the cases transmitted from people going out and not being conscious of this 2-meter rule and wearing PPE, gloves, masks, etc., etc. And then even more specific, a more specific number is 55% of all new cases. That's all new transmissions are from community transmission. So we're being careful, obviously. And the Chief Medical Officer of Health says, you know what, let's be conscious of this. Let's understand that what the numbers mean. It means that if you go out and somebody else isn't being careful and they possibly have COVID-19, that's how you're going to get it. And that's likely how we're going to be seeing this evolve over the next couple of months. And they want to be able to avoid a large second wave. And the only way we're going to do that is to stay diligent with this 2-meter rule.